The last subgrouping we're going to talk about in prehistoric art is the Neolithic. And as I already mentioned, this is a time where we're settling down, right? And we're creating the structure of society. Looking here at the ruins of Jericho, this is a city that is in what we call the Levant area, kind of right between sort of Africa in the beginning of the Middle East, right? So it's right in this kind of transition zone. You may have heard of it if you're familiar with the Bible. And again, just a note about biblical archaeology versus historical archaeology. There is often some basis for, these archaeological sites supporting biblical tales, but not always, right? So we kind of look at those things as two different kind of categories. So if you're interested in the Bible and like the archaeology of the Bible, it's kind of a different type of category from what we call historical archaeology. Um, we do think that this was the reference point for the biblical story of Jericho with the idea of these big walls. And I'd mentioned that the walls were used for defense. So we find that people are not nomadic or tribal and they're settling into a specific place. And as they settle into that place, they're trying to protect their resources. They're thinking about what kind of resources they have, whether it's their agriculture, their domesticated animals, their population in general, and how to protect it because it's a resource for them now, and they have to make sure that those resources are secure. The most fascinating thing that we find at Jericho is the heads. So I gave you some videos on this. Definitely watch the videos. It's the actual archaeologist talking about the find. And what was unique about the find was it was found very much towards the end of the dig schedule. And most digs are not ongoing 24/7, 12 months a year. There's sometimes climate concerns that make a dig go dormant for a bit of the year, right? Whether it's rainy or too hot or whatever, just to give the archaeologists a break, So they were at the end of their dig schedule for that year, and they saw this head kind of poking out from a couple layers down than they had gotten to. And if you know archaeology, it's done in a layered system. You literally dig down through layers, and it's very systematic in how it's done. So they had to decide, whether to pull the head out of the layer, which is kind of bad archaeology, or potentially leave it and have a looter come or somebody disturb it. So they decided to pull it out, and they found this head, and they were like, "What is this? We've never seen anything like this before." And what they believe they found with this and the other heads they found there, I believe there are about like nine of them, is that what they think it references is this idea of perhaps a thought of an afterlife, or referencing the dead and giving them respect, because these are actual skulls covered over with plaster and then often adorned with shells or some kind of items to make the head look more lifelike, right? So they might put like a shell in the eye, and paint it to make it look like an iris, to make them look a little bit more lifelike. So these are actual skulls, right, with plaster over top of them. So we think that they're perhaps a way of honoring the dead and suggesting that these people are now thinking that there's something beyond our living life, right? So I talked about we start to ask esoteric questions of like what happens to us, right? Where do we go? What happens? And this idea of honoring the dead, perhaps. You'll notice the bottom of it is flat. So we came to the conclusion that these were displayed in some kind of way. And one of the places that helps us kind of pull this, idea together is looking at contemporary practice in Peru. So I'd gone to Peru a couple years ago and went to the city of Ollantaytambo, and it's very much a tourist place now. Most of their economy is seeing tourists, and a lot of the people let you come in and out of their houses, which I'm always like very like, wow, okay, I wouldn't want people in and out of my house. So I was in one of the homes and I saw this altar that basically looked like it was in the living room with these skulls on it, and these are real human skulls. And so I asked in my rusty Spanish, is are these your ancestors? To which they said, see, yes, they are. I said, do they help you? Do they talk to you? Do they influence you? And they basically were like, yeah, that's why they're there. So these people feel very strongly that when you die, you don't, in a sense, leave the realm of influence on your family, that there's some sense of liminality, as we'd say, or movement between the spheres, that the spheres are permeable, that death isn't, something that's like a wall slamming shut. And so we think that perhaps in Jericho, they believe the same thing, that by keeping their ancestors close, by keeping them nearby, right, that they could consult with them, and that they could honor them at the same time. We see a similar practice at the city of Catalhook, where they bury their dead underneath the floors of their homes. Again, we think this is a way of keeping your dead very close to you and being influential to you. The other reason we talk about Catalhoyuk is to look at the city design. So this is a site plan. You'll notice that we've what we call a reconstruction drawing, because the ruins of Catalhoyuk are not much to look at. So what they've done is reconstructed the city essentially. Catalhoyuk is located in Turkey. And when I was visiting Turkey recently, a lot of people wanted to stop by and see this, and I was like, "There's nothing to see." And the guide was like, "Yeah, there's nothing to see." So the ruins themselves are pretty unimpressive. So what they've done is sort of build out, what the city would have looked like. And you'll notice there's no streets, and we think that was done again for defense. Where Jericho built very large walls, Catalhoyuk, what they did was eliminate streets. So that way, if an enemy comes upon you, there's nowhere for really the enemy to go. You're up on top of the rooftop, kind of looking down at them. So it's awesome. There also was a city that was built up into a mountain that looked down into a valley. So you had the mountain at your back and the valley in front of you. So you were positioned where enemies couldn't come behind you and attack you, and you could see your enemies coming and then be up on the rooftops ready to defend yourselves. The mountain was a bad choice. We'll talk about that in a minute. We go and look at the rooms within Catalhoyuk when they're doing the archaeology here. They seem to find again a lot of evidence of religiosity aimed towards animals. So where I brought up that we don't really have like religion as we think about it yet, but we have sort of these esoteric questions about death, perhaps, and they also still seem to be honoring animals because to them animals were their life. You had to have these products available to you to live. So what we see them worshiping still seems to be animals. They haven't kind of developed beyond that at this point. There was a high level of religiosity at Catalhoyuk. So for every 3 rooms, one was some kind of shrine. So like a 3-to-1 ratio of religiosity here. That's pretty damn high. So these were spiritual people, and animals seemed to be their focus. Now, I mentioned that the mountain would be a bad idea. That's because the mountain was actually a volcano. Whoops, right? Whoopsie. But they didn't know that, so we really can't, fault them. They thought they were making a good strategic choice there. But the volcano does erupt during the time when people are living here, and it destroys about 2/3 of the city. How do we know this? We know this from the archaeological evidence, because as you're digging down through the layers, all of a sudden you have this city that's kind of built up higher than the other part of the city on ash. So you realize that, oh, the city got kind of wiped out and then they just rebuilt on top of the ash. So about 2/3 of the city was wiped out. And this is the first history painting that documents that event. So it's the first painting that actually is not about something symbolic, it's about something true, something specific that happened. And we think it was made for the same reasons why we do this today. It's commemorative, it's to remind you of the horror or the cataclysm of the event. It's to celebrate those who lost their lives, it's to mourn. Humans are very sentimental, so this art, again, is a very commemorative type of piece. I also love it because it has 2 different perspectives. Perspective is the way you're viewing something, looking at it, and you'll notice that you're seeing the city from above like you're a bird, or what we call an aerial viewpoint, and you're seeing the volcano straight on. So today an art teacher would probably tell you you can't do that. You can't mix your perspectives unless you're trying to be ironic or something. Um, but again, remember these are symbolic people. They want you to understand the image rather than it be realistically or visually correct. So I always point out, think about how they're making these objects and what kind of approach they're taking and why. The final object I'm going to show you from the Neolithic to conclude this module, right, is the megalithic architecture. Mega, big, lithic, rock. That's all there is to it. And there's really 3 types of basic megalithic constructions. There is the dolmens. If you break up the word, it's actually an old Cornish word that literally means like whole stone. Digging a hole in the ground and putting a stone on top of it. These were typically used for burials, and we assume it was high ranking burials that were being done using dolmens. We also can look at menhirs. So, again, if you look at the word men, right, is stone. Here is like line, so stone lines. Um, Again, derived from the Cornish, and you'll notice that these are stone lines. Menhirs are stone lines. And what we think the menhirs did was lead people along directional routes. Most megaliths are found in Northern Europe, so like Northern France, Northern Germany, or especially on the British Isles. So if you go to the British Isles, there's lots of megaliths there. Of course, the most famous, Stonehenge, right? Stonehenge is the most famous, right? In Stonehenge, again, if you break apart the word stone, it's what it is, and then a henge is a circular arrangement. So if you look at this aerial shot of Stonehenge, you'll notice it's a circular arrangement. There were lots of henges built in the Neolithic times, especially in Britain, but most of them were built with wood. So they disintegrated, and we no longer have anything besides the post holes to look at. Stonehenge is the only evidence we have of like a major henge done of stone. And for that reason, of course, it survives. Now, what's interesting also about Stonehenge is it was built over a long period of time, about 2500 BC to about 1400 BC ish, right? Rough dates. So you'll notice it was what we call a generational project. It was something that was built by generations upon generations of people living in the Salisbury Plain area of England. So there, again, it's not something built overnight. It was something that was added onto. We think what happened was, people brought a stone to Stonehenge. And so I gave you a video kind of getting into this a little bit as well. So we think this was very much a generational project, very long and ongoing. There's various theories about Stonehenge, aliens, all that kind of crap, right? Yeah, dismiss that. The major theories that we entertain as archaeologists and art historians are a calendar, right? A burial site, right? These are the popular ones. That it was a calendric system, right? Or it was a burial site for higher ranking people. How was it made? We don't really know exactly, so it's very mysterious. So I gave you a diagram here of two different ways that maybe were employed to deal with these large sarsen stones. And the sarsen stones are very special as well because they were quarried a length of about 40, 50 miles away and brought to the site. So we know that these stones were considered special because they had to transport them over a long distance, right, to bring them to the site. And we assume it was because the people thought they had some kind of magical qualities, maybe. Again, don't really know. But these were huge stones. I mean, they weighed tons, the equivalent of multiple cars put together. And again, you can look at these two diagrams, kind of a lever pulley system, a stacking system. But at the end of the day, we don't really know, how they did it. Now you can ignore the corbel on the right, just ignore it. Don't worry about it. But I wanted to point out the post and lintel on the left. Stonehenge is architecture, and a lot of people sometimes forget that because it's not enclosing a space. And I'm like, you have to remember architecturally, architecture is about building systems, right? That's what it's about. So the post and lintel is a system that then will later be used in design of homes and buildings and spaces that are enclosed and used for living. You'll notice the two posts and the lintel on top. Go look at any doorway. It's a post and a lintel. That's what it is. It's the basic kind of idea that leads to the arching systems that you'll see later. So it's important to think about this within architectural construction terms. Now, I mentioned that some of the theories, right? One of them is as a calendar. So here's a diagram of what happens during the midwinter, midsummer sunset as the sun moves through what we call the heel stones to the altar stone. Now, think about how I told you about the birth of archaeology and art history being during the 1800s. They called it an altar stone. I don't think any sacrifices ever happen here. So again, just like the aliens, throw that out. There were no human sacrifices here. But again, these are the terms we still use. So many people wonder if this site was used to inform the people when it was time to plant and when it was time to harvest. And again, to me, this is a type of spirituality that, again, isn't like our formal religion you see today, but is a very sort of interesting thing to consider. And again, I think, Stonehenge is a very mysterious site for people because there's a lot of unknowns. Again, the two theories that are most strongly supported, of course, are the calendar and the burials. Recently, they found some burials near to here. It's kind of on the outer circle, but they wonder if this is a place where you were honoring higher ranking people, similar to what you would do perhaps with a dolmen, but on a larger scale. But, again, really at the end of the day, there's a lot more questions than there are answers to Stonehenge. And so I leave you on a mysterious note at the end of prehistory.